I'm going to just sort of kick things off here. It's funny because I was thinking about this conference last year this time and how just a month or two before we had the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, which came as a complete surprise to absolutely everybody, including I think the key vote in the United States Senate that made it happen seemed just as surprised as the rest of us. At this conference last year, I think there was an enormous amount of hand-wringing as we were asking ourselves, what's going to happen with all of that federal money that's coming down the pike? And now, a year later, I think we have an answer to that. And the answer is, in part, tens of thousands of pages of guidance is what happened, which is how many of us have spent the last year, is sorting through just an astonishing quantity of federal paperwork, coming to grips with the details of these programs and what those mean and how it is that we're going to deploy those funds in the state of New Hampshire. And no one has lived that more vividly than the three folks who are on the stage today. The other thing that happened at last year's conference was we had a panel in which we asked, what will come of the Inflation Reduction Act funding? And that panel was held in one of the small subrooms, and the degree to which it was just absolutely overflow with people bursting out the doors into the hallway was pretty hard to watch. And so we said, this year we're going to do the panel again. We're going to know a lot more about the details of the programs and how it is that they're actually getting deployed. And we're going to have it in the big room because we know that this is the information that everybody wants to hear. So that was the main conceit of what we're about to hear today. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, which is Andre Briere, who is with the Department of Transportation. And we've just been having a fascinating conversation about the difference between an assistant and a deputy commissioner, which Andre will probably not dig into, but I'll hand the podium to this gentleman.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it. Thanks very much, Sam. So, everybody hear me? Is the mic working? All right. I'm Andre Briere. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of NHDOT. And I am here to talk to you a little bit about how it's going with IIJA and the funding that we do have for NEVI and other various programs. And finally, wrap it up with some persistent hurdles. So the first half of my talk, I'm going to be reading some music just so I'm imparting the information I need to impart. And the last part is a little improv jazz that I hope you don't quote me on, because I do want to talk honestly and frankly about the persistent hurdles that we are seeing. And if you're wondering, this is what happens when you break up a dog fight. So as I wave my hand around, you don't have to be concerned for me. I will live. All right, so for NEVI, a lot of action recently. We have $17.2 million total in funding. And we have a plan that has been approved by Federal Highways. They've already approved $9.9 million of that, so that's just the most current tranche of that $17.2 million, but we'll get additional funds every FY as we move forward. We just released the first RFP for 6 sites, and that was back on October 13th, focusing on the interstate system, the corridors, and as well as New Hampshire Route 16. Of note, we're requiring both CCS and the NACS plugs with the full anticipation that NACS is going to be the standard moving forward. We just didn't want these chargers outdated before they even hit the streets. Construction begins in 2024 on these sites, and we are going to release a second RFP in 2024 calendar year. For CFIs, we requested a bit over $4 million in multiple sites in the North Country to make it most competitive. We're waiting on that announcement. We do anticipate it in the next month or so. And we could begin construction in 2024 if selected, which we're hopeful. And DES also has a piece of this for community charging, and that is $10 million, and we did get together and deconflict those requests. They have a lot more flexibility, and we'll get to that in the persistent hurdles at the end, as far as what you can deploy, what you need to deploy, how that has to look. Carbon reduction program, we've been working with the state municipal planning organizations to develop a strategy. to utilize that money, and that's $20.5 million, which can be used both on projects and on strategies to reduce transportation emissions. And we will be using that for EV charging infrastructure as well. For CMAQ, I don't know how much you follow that in this room. That's very much a highway project-focused effort. We did get a bunch of CMAQ requests. We're in the CMAQ cycle for this 10-year plan. We just wrapped up our GASSET hearings, what we call our statewide, over 30 of those in every executive council district. Lots of questions on CMAQ. The bottom line is, of all the CMAQ applications we got, we broke out the EV charger requests as CMAQ because that didn't fit most appropriately here. That's more appropriate for NEVI, responding to NEVI RFPs and other associated programs. But the good news is all the CMAQ requests that we received that were non-EV chargers are going to get funded. The Executive Council wanted to break them out of our 10-year plan, but we have plenty of funds to fulfill all of the CMAQ requests from around the state. All right, now I get to talk. I was talking with some of our congressional staffers this morning about that first item, near and dear to a lot of our hearts, which is Buy America, Build America. The way we talk about it usually is that there's not too many folks who disagree with the goals of Buy America, Build America. We all do. It's important to develop the industrial and manufacturing infrastructure to support the new EV economy right here in America. We all agree with that. The simple fact of the matter, though, and I will preface everything I say from here on out, is that I'm giving you my personal views. Do not attribute them to the NHDOT, because I'm going to speak a little frankly here, but still in the spirit of what we're thinking at DOT, which is we have to find a way to get the equipment, the electrical transformers, everything from the chargers themselves to associated equipment, and we've got to find a way to do it in conformance with BABA. I can't say we have the answer right now. The fact is, we got 50 states and associated territories that are going to be going after the same manufacturers, the same equipment, at the same time, trying to spend the money in the same time frame. And for anybody in this room that doesn't think that's inflationary or is going to cause supply chain backups, you're probably not paying attention, because it's going to be. And that's a challenge that we're talking to our congressional staff, to federal highways about all the time. They're fully aware of our concerns, and they're concerns that are shared by every state in the country right now. The second thing I want to talk about briefly is demand pricing. We are in a lot of conversations with Eversource and our colleagues about how do we get past that? How do we come up with a different framework? How do we come up with an alternate way to achieve the goals of demand pricing? Again, this is something that we kind of all intuitively get. Why do we have demand pricing in terms of electricity? Well, it's because we want to ensure that the heaviest users contribute to supporting the system, and to building out that system is necessary. That's a goal that makes sense. When it comes to EV charging, especially if you start looking at the electrical demand that's going to be required for other modes than highway. So for instance, aircraft that need electrical charging. There's no way to make that financially viable with demand charging the way it's currently constructed. The electrical demands of even charging a single electrical aircraft are extraordinary. And they would immediately make it financially unviable to operate an electrical fleet. Now, having said that, Cape Air, many other airlines, Cape Air's already put in orders. I believe it's for almost 100 aircraft. Other aircraft operators are thinking about similar orders. We have to develop the charging infrastructure to charge these aircraft, and it's got to be in a way that makes financial sense. Otherwise, they're just going to go to other states that manage to overcome that hurdle. I think it's overcomeable. But some suggested solutions like more on-prem battery storage while helpful, it's still not going to overcome that. And please don't take my comments here as doom and gloom. They're not. These are just hurdles that we need to, as state officials, work with our partners to overcome. One thing we talked to Federal Highway about also is the configuration of the chargers themselves. To have 4 fast DC chargers in one location makes a lot of sense for the southern tier. Maybe makes less sense in the North Country, depending on the actual demands that go into that. So we are working with Federal Highway to see if could be a waiver process for that. But right now we're going with the standard that's been put out in the NEVI GOFO for 4 fast DC chargers. I already kind of hit on the labor and supply shortages. We're all dealing with this post-pandemic reality. For multiple year wait times for a lot of key electrical equipment. So that's going to be an ongoing challenge moving forward. I'll leave the utility capacity for my good colleagues because they've got a lot more to say and probably more intelligent comments than I could give you. Other than to say that the general consensus on the highway, the DOT side of this conversation is that we need to double, if not triple, our capacity. There's some debate. Our colleagues in California are a little more optimistic, but that's a conversation that's happening within state DOT circles for sure. So the last thing I'll talk about before I hand over the mic is road toll. So that's our euphemism in New Hampshire to talk about the funding that we use for our highway fund. Right now, it's collected via a gas tax or road toll, as we call it. We've been testifying along with everybody on this panel, I think, in the legislature last session, and we're certain to talk more this session about alternatives. How do we get the highway fund healthy? Right now, most of the impact of the highway fund, very frankly, is not on EVs. It's not from EVs. It's from greater fuel efficiency in the gas fleet. That's really continued to take a chunk out of the highway fund. Largely, we've recovered to pre-pandemic traffic levels. When you look at our tourism and you look at our road counts and TomTom data that we analyze, we're pretty much fully recovered. But the highway fund hasn't recovered as of now. The $50 and $100 registration fees that were passed last session is helpful, but again, is not a long-term solution because that's only being collected from New Hampshire taxpayers and New Hampshire registrants. We don't want to lose the opportunity to let our good friends in Massachusetts help maintain our roads. So apologies for any Mass people in here, but yeah, we'd like that. I love the little smattering of applause. You could applaud that. Let's let Mass buy our roads. All right. We're all for it. But the fact of the matter is most EV charging is done at home. Until we have some kind of separate metering, it's going to be exceedingly challenging to, in a fair way, assess a road toll equivalent out of EV chargers. It's not something that we're leaving at that, though, and we're actively exploring with our friends over at the legislature what we might do in the future, and that's going to be an ongoing conversation, I'm sure, into the next session. So with that, I'll hand it back, and hopefully you got some insight into what we're thinking at DOT, but I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, sir. So it would not be an opportunity to step up to a microphone without me mispronouncing somebody's name. Apologies. I would just call him Andre. So DOT in this particular instance is actually the young gun when it comes to EV funding. The OGs are the Department of Environmental Services, who of course had to administer the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust Fund, which came from the Dieselgate scandal, which you all may know. So I will then hand the microphone to Jessica Wilcox.
Oh. Thank you, sir. Can everyone hear me okay? And I know that I just kind of had a little squeaky voice there. I've been out trying to drive you all over to the electric vehicle ride and drive event we had out there. So in the process, I'm losing my voice here. But thank you, Sam and Andre, for the homage. Good to see all these faces out here today. I am Jessica Wilcox, and I have to say, as I'm losing my voice, y'all know what happens when you get that little catch in your throat. So if I apologize ahead of time, so I won't be able to turn my microphone off if I have to turn and cough. So you're all gonna hear it. But I'd like to start, first of all, by kind of like answering a little bit more about what is driving this transition that we're on to electrification. So I work in the Air Resources Division at the Department of Environmental Services. And there, for us, air quality is really just our overarching priority of our work, right? So in New Hampshire, the largest source of our greenhouse gas emissions, this is our smog-forming, climate-warming emissions, is coming from transportation, right? Cars and trucks. Electric vehicles, particularly those with no tailpipe, like the Audi e-tron that was out there and the Porsche Taycan, if any of you rode in that, these battery electric vehicles, these are a solution to that problem. In addition to the public health benefits, the environmental benefits of electric vehicles, EVs also represent an economic opportunity for New Hampshire. Our tourism industry is the #2 industry in our state. Currently, states from Virginia all the way up to Maine have adopted California's zero emissions vehicle mandate. And this is pushing those automakers to sell hundreds of thousands of electric vehicles in their states over the next 5 to 10 years. Quebec has also committed to 2 million EVs by 2030, 2 million. So as more EV drivers visit, work, and live in our state, they're going to be looking for places to plug in. New Hampshire's main streets, our rural communities, our tourist attractions, and our travel destinations, they're really EV hotspots for all season. So let's take a little look at our current state of charge. As of the end of 2022, there were over 9,700 plug-in electric vehicles registered in New Hampshire. And as you can see from this slide, the majority of them were registered in the Seacoast, right here in the Queen City of Manchester, and also the surrounding suburbs. In New Hampshire, EV registrations are increasing year over year. We're closing in on nearly 1% of light-duty vehicle registrations. And this does not account for tourists, the snowbirds, and our weekend visitors from Massachusetts, our friends. ISO New England, our grid operator, has projected that New Hampshire is going to see an increase to 140,000 EVs in the next decade, with 2.3 million across New England. Now, as a tourism state, that's important, right? So if we see 140,000 in our state, but there's millions around us, where are they going to go? So that's the question. How do we support these folks that are driving EVs in New Hampshire? Currently, there are 27 what we consider universal direct current fast charging locations, and this does not include Tesla. When I say universal, I'm talking about the combined charging system network. Once again, as you can see from this slide, our neighboring states have double and quadruple the number of direct current fast chargers, so there's work to be done. There are currently 170 public level 2 chargers, so this is a little bit of a slower charge. This does not include Tesla. Note that Vermont and Maine have about double that, with Massachusetts 15 times as many. So as Sam mentioned, New Hampshire is the lead agency. Our environmental services agency is the lead agency for the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust. We've committed the full 15% of that funding from the Volkswagen settlement, which equates to approximately $4.6 million to EV charging infrastructure. Resulting from a direct current fast charging funding opportunity that we administered, we received 30 proposals for multiple sites along what we consider our high travel transportation corridors. So think like our interstates and our major highways. So as you can see from this map, we were seeking a minimum of 50 kilowatt direct current fast charging, which today, 50 kilowatts, we're now seeing 150 kilowatts being a new standard. We were also looking for co-located level 2 because there's a lot of plug-in hybrid electric vehicles on the road, and those can't charge at the fast chargers. So we wanted to enable travel for not just our battery electric vehicles, but also the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. And this would enable, as you can see, kind of like the major north, south, east, west travel. So our intent is really to create a backbone of charging in New Hampshire. And so far we've had contracts for 6 sites that have been approved by the Governor and Executive Council. The other 6 sites that you can see on this slide are currently in contract negotiations. So our good friend Bill, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, provides funding to federal highways to implement, as Andre Briere was saying, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, or the NEVI program. Federal highways also had some discretionary funding. So the DOT's getting that 17 million, but there was this additional bucket of funding through their competitive discretionary program. Honestly, it's like $3 billion that was available that also would address corridors and community EV charging. So they split that down to $1.25 billion for corridors and $1.25 billion for community. Earlier this year, Federal Highways took a portion of that $1.25 billion for the community charging, and they released this $350 million funding opportunity that only state agencies and towns and cities across the nation could apply for. So in June, DES, our agency, decided to submit an application for $10 million. As you heard Andre say, they submitted an application for the corridor side of that for $4 million. So we submitted on the community side for $10 million, and what we would propose would be a statewide community EV charging subgrant program that would target our main streets, our tourist destinations, and the gaps that might be left over from all this focus on the corridors. So as I said, this was competitive funding, and states are not guaranteed this funding. We're hoping that we're going to hear in the next month or two, fingers crossed, we could get some of that funding, we could get all of it, or we could get none of it, but we're doing some work. So the goals for this funding really are, 1, provide destination charging opportunities for residents and our travelers and tourists. 2, engage EV drivers to plug in and explore our quaint towns and our lively cities. 3, offer charging for residents who can't access charging at home. Think folks that live in apartments or condos. And 4, to invest in historically underserved and overburdened communities. We've taken some steps to engage stakeholders. We want input. We want to know, how do we craft a funding opportunity? If we get this money, how do we make it accessible to towns and cities here in New Hampshire? So we've held a public listening session recently on the 26th of October. We had a public comment form that was open. We took in a lot of written comment. And man, you guys have gotten smart. Like, I feel silly for even educating you anymore, because when I'm approaching you about participating in the ride and drive, many of you already are driving electric. So I'm sure you're also feeling like, where do I go to charge? So we got some fantastic feedback from this. The recordings, the slide deck, and the related information will soon be posted on our website, so stay tuned for more on that. So this federal funding that's coming from federal highways, this federal funding that we applied for $10 million for, it has certain requirements and certain priorities and standards that we're gonna have to meet. They're not gonna be flexible, right? We can be flexible in some places, but this is where we can't be. Priority locations under this funding are going to include commerce and culture centers, so think like museums, libraries, shopping malls. Our rural locations, the North Country, the Upper Valley, locations near multi-unit dwellings like apartment complexes, our tourist attractions, our parks and our public spaces where people go to recreate, and locations near transit hubs like bus and train stations. So there's these minimum requirements that we can't bend on. These restrictions are going to require that all sites must support charging at least 4 electric vehicles simultaneously. The beauty of this is, unlike that 17 million that DOT is getting for the corridors, there's a little bit more flexibility with the community charging. So even though there have to be 4 plugs that can simultaneously charge 4 EVs at one time, they can be a combination of level 2 and DC fast. They don't have to all be direct current fast charging. So we could potentially fund more than 4 ports, but not less. The ports could all be level 2, all fast chargers, or some combination of both. If anybody puts fast chargers in, they have to at least be able to provide a minimum of 150 kilowatts. And all fast chargers must have the combined charging system charging plugs, or the CCS1 plugs. And basically, You know, the federal government has made this attempt to try to standardize the charging ports at these fast charging stations. The challenge right now that we're facing is Tesla came in with their North American charging standard, and it's a network that, as we all know, if you see Tesla charging stations, they're everywhere, right? So Tesla's been having some side conversations with some of our major automakers, and a lot of them are starting to think, maybe I should start building these EVs with the Tesla plug so I can tap into that network. So the federal government has been saying CCS1, or the combined charging system, is the network to go with. So, you know, what we gotta do is be creative here. We gotta be thinking ahead. This technology is moving really fast. So just as a little reminder, we have applied for this federal funding. We have not yet been awarded, nor is there a guarantee that we will be. So in addition to our good friend Bill and that funding, we've got IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, our other good friend. And the beauty of IRA is that IRA refunded several tax credits that had gone dormant over the years, one of which is the EV charging infrastructure tax credit. So little disclaimer here, this is good for every one of you are consumers. I see you all, we're all consumers, right? Every one of you wanted to drive that Porsche. You weren't thinking about what your town or your school needs. You're thinking, I want to get in that Porsche. So these are tax credits you can tap into. They may not be tax credits that your town or your school could tap into, but if you do incur a tax burden, these credits are available. For any business that put in a public charger, they have the potential to get up to 30% of the eligible cost of that charging project, which is capped at $30,000. There are some kind of unfortunate location requirements, such as a census tract. There has to be in an area where the census tract is not an urban area, and they kind of make people scratch their heads a little bit. So if you have questions about that, you know, reach out to us, because we know how to help you solve those questions. Private consumers, so all y'all, can also get up to $1,000 for qualified charging equipment. So if you put a charger in your garage, this tax credit may be available to you. There's also a light-duty EV tax credit for light-duty electric vehicles, and that can provide a credit up to $7,500. But there are requirements on the vehicle, the build, final assembly. It's gonna sound like something that is another language, and believe me, I spent the last 6 years learning that language, so if you have any questions about it, please do reach out to us. And finally, the commercial EV tax credit. So any business that's purchasing medium and heavy duty electric vehicles can apply for tax credits up to 15% of the purchase price for plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, 30% of the purchase price for battery electric vehicles, or the delta between the vehicle compared to an equivalent ICE vehicle. Of course, whichever is less. So there's, you know, something to pay attention to there. So also through the IRA, the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant is funding states to update or to develop a climate action plan. So once again, DES, our Environmental Service Agency, we've been awarded $3 million through EPA's program to update our 2009 New Hampshire Climate Action Plan. What we will need to do is identify actionable measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The beauty is that there's many key sectors that can be tackled through the CPRG grant. Transportation, electricity generation, commercial and residential buildings, and on and on. This funding will be available to government agencies separately to put proposed reduction measures in place. And so we'll get to that in just a minute. So DES has this $3 million, and what we need to do right now is focus on putting together a priority climate action plan, or, and you're gonna love this, because in the state of New Hampshire, or in the state in general, or the federal government in general, everything's about acronyms. Although, just a little side note, they're actually abbreviations. An acronym is really only if you say EVE instead of EV. Now it's an abbreviation. So we've got an abbreviation for the Priority Climate Action Plan, which is PCAP. We also have to put together a comprehensive climate action plan, take it to the next level, and that's the CCAP. So the PCAP, the Priority Climate Action Plan, is due March 1st of 2024. 2024, that's just what? A few months from now. Completion of this Priority Climate Action Plan is going to be a prerequisite to allow our state to compete for $4.6 billion in implementation grants. $4.6 billion, when we talk these kind of numbers, I can't even visualize that. The CCAP, or that Comprehensive Climate Action Plan, is going to be due August 15th of 2025. So we've got about a year and a half for that. But what we are going to want to do is engage the public and get some feedback on this. Because phase 2 of this is implementation. That $4.6 billion will be available nationally for implementation grants. Those applications are going to be due to EPA by April 1st. So we've got this PCAP due March 1st to unlock this money, and then the funding will be available with applications due 1 month later. So New Hampshire DES is developing an outreach and communication plan, which is going to be announced shortly, and I'm going to be sharing this out, so there'll be a link to sign up for email updates. And if you have questions, please do reach out to my colleagues at cprg@des.nh.gov. That's my little plug for that. So, transportation electrification announcements, they have been bombarding us, a consistent and steady drumbeat. From EV-focused federal funding opportunities like our new friends Bill and Ira, to new EV models being announced by automakers, to states that are requiring increasing sales of EVs over the next decade, folks. If we want to ensure that EVs can travel everywhere, not just on our corridors, not just on our highways, and not just on our hubs, then much more charging is going to be needed than this current funding can address. This is where all y'all, businesses, utilities, towns and cities are going to play a key role in moving that forward. Because when it comes to electric vehicles and EV charging, folks, let's keep them coming. That's all I got for you.
So if your head is spinning, just imagine being Chris Ellms, because while DES has a lot of programs they can apply to, the Department of Energy is where all of them come to rest. So get out your pencils, make sure they are sharp, and get ready to write them down, because there's a lot coming down through. So Chris Ellms, sir, take the microphone.
I came to the microphone, I realized I'm mic'd up. Super happy to be here. I'm Chris Ellms, I'm the Deputy Commissioner of the New Hampshire Department of Energy. As Sam alluded to, and you know, thank you to my colleagues for leading me off, but we have a lot of different programs. I'm gonna try to speak fast so I can get through them. I do wanna be clear that, you know, this is not gonna be a comprehensive list of all the funding opportunities. I'm gonna talk about a lot of what we're looking at, but I would really encourage you, there's gonna be information at the end of this. There are a whole bunch of resources. We have a newsletter. The White House has some really good sites with lists of funding opportunities that are going to be available to you. We really encourage you to, take a look at them, talk to the entities that you're a part of, talk to us, and we can see how we can help bring as much of this funding to New Hampshire as we possibly can. So this is real brief. The Department of Energy, we're relatively new, newest state agency. We were created 2 years ago. The PUC still exists. They handle adjudication. We handle just about everything else. So what's interesting to us here today is federal funding. Most of the federal funding opportunities at the Department of Energy happen in our Division of Policy and Programs. Our division director is a guy named Josh Elliott, who I think a lot of you know, but if not, take down his email address. He's going to be able to answer a lot of questions. Sorry, couldn't be here today. So we have a lot of federal funding that existed prior to the IIJA and the IRA. We handle the state's energy assistance programs, the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program and the Low-Income Weatherization Assistance Program are both administered through the Department of Energy. Although in the IIJA we did get significant funding increases for both, so we've had a lot of scaling up there, which has been really exciting for us. But we're a small agency, smaller than our colleagues here, so something that we've really needed to do, and I think a lot of states, especially smaller states, have had to do, is prepare to staff up to administer this huge influx of funding that's coming in. So one thing that we've done is create a dedicated federal funds team that has approvals from the requisite, the Joint Legislative Fiscal Committee and the Governor and Council. We're hiring for that now. If you know anybody who's interested, reach out to us. Because there's a lot that goes into this federal funding opportunity, right? We need to be looking at, things like getting feedback from folks, designing programs, designing an application, getting that approved, implementing those programs, doing the outreach that we need to do to folks like you, to constituents, to get that money out there, and making sure that we're complying with what the federal government wants us to do. And there's a lot of restrictions and requirements that we do need to account for. You know, we have both formula grants and we have competitive grants. The formula grants are those, you know, the state or whatever entity has been given an allocation. If we have an acceptable application, we're going to get that money. There are also competitive grants that, you know, entities may apply for, and that they're going to have to compete with a whole variety of other entities. So we're looking at both of those opportunities, and it's going to be really important for us to be able to partner with folks like yourself and organizations that you're a part of if we're going to be able to move forward with some of these competitive grant opportunities. So let's take a look at some of this funding. The IIJA, or the BIL, depending on what you want to call it, is you know, a huge infrastructure law. I know this is supposed to be a year later for some of this. We're 2 years later from the IIJA, and it's nice to see some of that funding get going. You know, there are a whole bunch of spending, but about $62 billion of that is going to you know, DOE, US DOE, and the way we've kind of looked at it as a state government is that we look at our corresponding state agencies and you know, try to, you know, flow those through occasionally. So the EPA is something that DES takes control of. We handle the DOE. So one program that exists prior to the IIJA was the State Energy Program. It's a grant that's given to every state energy office. Most states, my understanding is that most states will use that funding for staff. New Hampshire does use that for some staff, but we do have some programming, like our SEED program, which I'm going to talk to in a second here. We also, I think the state energy, well, I know the state energy managers here. We spend a good amount of money over there so that we can do energy efficiency projects in state buildings. It's been incredibly cost effective for the state. I think we're over $100,000 a year in annual savings. So those guys are doing a really great job. If you see them, give them a pat on the back. But the IIJA allocated an additional, well, a bunch of money, $3.5 million to the state. This is going to be the pot of funding that we use to fund our federal funds team. We're using it to expand our seed grant program, which I'm about to talk about. And we also use it for a state energy security plan, which helps us on an annual basis assess risks and opportunities in our energy security. And that's a requirement of the federal government. So the seed grant is a program that started, oh, my slide numbers are off, that started in 2018. We use it to do energy efficiency improvements in schools. It stands for the School Energy Efficiency Development Grant. This is something that we've used to great effect to help really small schools make investments that they might not otherwise be able to make. We had projects done in Hill, Leominster, New Boston, Litchfield, and we currently have a project underway in Berlin. These completed projects have really helped these communities see significant savings, both in terms of their energy consumption and their utility and taxpayer bills. So that's been really good, and we're hoping to expand that in the IIJA through the additional SEP funding. So one exciting program is the Energy Efficiency Revolving Loan Fund. This is, this IIJA offered $250 million to states to help establish revolving loan funds for energy efficiency upgrades, retrofits, and energy audits. And all projects that get this funding must have been identified in a program-compliant energy audit. So I hate to say that $250 million is a small amount of money, but there is a broad mission attached to this, and we've really had to focus our mission. New Hampshire's allocation is $800,000. We've planned, what we've applied to the federal government is to use that for a loan loss reserve program for commercial buildings. We've proposed using this loan loss reserve mechanism because we've seen it used effectively in New Hampshire, specifically through the Business Finance Authority. It's a mechanism that provides a credit enhancement that helps protect a lender's investment, and it allows them to make loans more confidently, to give better terms to those loans. We want to do this mechanism because we see it as an opportunity to maximize the volume of the loans. that we can give out with such a small amount of money. And I think that's going to be able to help us leverage more private capital, again, allowing us to do more loans. We did apply for these funds in May, and we're hoping that the awards are going to be approved for the state by the end of the year with funding available in 2024, but of course that's dependent on the federal government approving our application. So the next program I want to talk about is the EECBG. It's the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant, $550 million. That's being used to help reduce fossil fuel emissions, reduce total energy use, and improve energy efficiency. I will note $110 million was removed from that allocation by the US DOE for technical assistance programs. New Hampshire is set to receive $1.6 million. And when I say New Hampshire, in this instance, I am referring to the state government. There are also local governments that are allocated through this formula grant. All 10 counties and the 10 largest municipalities in the state are also eligible for funding. And that's something we've worked closely with them. We had a meeting, I think, just last week with all 20 of those entities and US DOE to help them work through those applications. Their applications will be due in April, and New Hampshire the state has made our application already. We are pursuing through the EECBG fund. And I'll just note on the EECBG that was created in 2009 through ARA. It has been dormant since then, but it's been refunded. We wanted to try to do something a little new with it, and so we've come up with this municipal solar grant program. This is something that we really want to try to do to help disadvantaged towns in particular, and smaller towns access some of the benefits of solar. These projects are designed to be relatively small, and this is going to help smaller towns and towns with fewer resources avoid some of the more strenuous environmental reviews and to encourage direct ownership of these projects. We're going to hope that we can have these funds available in a competitive solicitation very soon, but we do need federal approvals. There's a balancing act that we have to do to make sure that we get the approvals we need to actually be able to send out this money while having things ready in time for towns to be able to meet their town meeting schedules. So we're hoping to have that available very soon. This is an exciting pot of money. It's the Grid Resiliency Formula Grants. It's in Section 40101D of the IIJA. This is funding that's being made to help improve electric resilience and reduce the frequency and duration of disruptive events. And in this case, disruptive events really means weather events. We recently accepted about $6.6 million in funding, and we accepted that at the end of September, and that represents the first 2 years of a 5-year grant. We expect somewhere in the neighborhood of $15 to $17 million over the 5-year duration of this grant. It's funding that's meant for electric distribution utilities and transmission owners to use all sorts of resilience-related activities. That could be anything from the undergrounding of electrical equipment, the hardening of electrical equipment, utility pole management, vegetation management, and even things like the use, and I'm going to read it here because I have to be careful, the use or construction of distributed energy resources for enhancing system adaptive capacity during disruptive events, including microgrids and battery storage subcomponents. I have to say it like that because I have to be very clear that construction of a new electric generation facility or large-scale battery storage facility that is not used for enhancing system adaptive capacity during disruptive events is not an eligible use, nor is cybersecurity. But the department is looking to distribute that funding through a competitive grant program, and we're hoping that'll be available sometime early 2024. So those are some big formula grants that we have through the IIJA. There are a ton of other funding opportunities, and you might have heard of some of them. Here are just a few more. There are all sorts of things that entities might be able to apply for, including folks in this room or organizations in this room. I really encourage you to go to the US DOE website. I encourage you to go to the White House websites on this legislation. Reach out to us, sign up for our newsletter. We'll have that sign up at the end here. Reach out to other members of your organizations that you're affiliated with. Reach out to your members of Congress because we want you to help us help you get the money, right? So if there's anything we can do, questions we can answer, please don't hesitate to reach out to us because there are a lot of opportunities to bring funding into New Hampshire. So that was the IIJA, and we've moved on to the Inflation Reduction Act. This bill contained about $400 million in spending on energy and climate issues. Like the IIJA, it has a variety of competitive opportunities, but it has some pretty substantial marquee projects that I think you've probably already heard something about, you're interested to hear about from me. And so we'll start by talking about the $8.8 billion in the 2 residential rebate programs that are heading our way at some point here in the future. So there are 2 programs within this that are going to provide rebates to residential consumers. One that's going to be focused on residential energy efficiency projects and one for residential electrification projects. There's going to be a lot of funding available for New Hampshire consumers. It's going to be something in the neighborhood of $70 million, about $35 million in each program. The program design is going to be really important for us to help ensure that we are successful here in New Hampshire. There are a lot of key issues that we're going to have to resolve and work through in our program design. That includes income verification, point of sale, and retroactivity on top of all the other federal restrictions and requirements. These are some of the most eagerly anticipated funds that we've heard about from consumers. I'm sure you've heard about them too. And I gotta say that that's presented some real difficulties because this bill, the IRA, passed in August of 2022, right? And then people want to talk about it. We look at what we passed, look at what we were able to get done. And consumers hear that and they get excited and they say, okay, I want to go out there and I want to, get some of these rebates. We've heard from consumers and we've heard from legislators who have constituents who say, hey, I went out, I got a loan, I bought a heat pump, when am I going to be able to get my tax credit? And unfortunately, for some of these people, the answer might be never. Because the way that this is designed and the way that it's come through just on the requirements, that retroactive payment might not be available to people. So we urge you, on this one, we really hope if you're talking to people, it's an exciting opportunity, but we need people to wait for the guidance that's available and wait for us to get the money and make these programs available. Just to give you a sense of that timeline, we applied for early administrative funds for this, and that's something that's been made available to states. It's a great opportunity because we need to staff up to really implement these programs. We applied in May. We got guidance from the federal government about these programs at the end of July. We just were awarded, and we were one of the first states to be awarded early administrative funds in September, and then the application for these funds is not due until January of 2025. And so it's, once we put in an application, it has to get approved, and then we can start implementing the programs. But there's going to be a while before constituents are going to see this money and have the opportunity to get it. So we really want folks to be able to get ready for this, but we want them to not make decisions that are going to negatively impact their ability to get these funds. I did mention it's January 2025 is the application due date, but we do intend to apply well in advance of that deadline if we're able to know that we have an application that we feel will be successful. So to talk a little bit about the actual individual programs, the first is the HOMES program, which will provide rebates for residential energy efficiency projects. New Hampshire's slated to receive about $35 million in funding for this program. Rebates are going to depend on the modeled or measured energy savings of the project, the income of the household, and whether or not it's a single or multifamily building. So that's, there are some eligibility determinants in statute, but that's something that's going to be stood up, as we are able to hire folks to help us stand up these programs. And so this is what I'm going to just tell you right up front, the acronym HERA. I had a little argument with my colleague Josh, who couldn't be here today. He insisted that this was what he wanted to be used for, but it stands for the High Efficiency Electric Home Rebate Program, which, different letters, but don't hold that against me. New Hampshire has similarly been allocated about $35 million for this program. It's designed to provide rebates for residential low and moderate income folks to electrify their homes. These rebates are going to have to be point of sale, income verified for certain projects, And those projects are going to be set out in statute, and those products are going to be set out in statute. You can see some of them on this slide. Yep, and so there are just a couple of more income requirements. And there's a, again, that requirement to have rebates available at the point of sale makes implementation of these programs pretty difficult, especially in New Hampshire, where income verification is a real difficulty. We're a state without an income tax, which is great, in your face, Massachusetts. But the one sort of downside there is that we don't have a lot of that, data that would help us do income verification. We're hopeful that there are going to be federal tools available that will help us do that, but it's going to be a real difficulty. So again, we have until September of 2031 to spend down these dollars. So Solar for All is a pretty exciting funding opportunity that's actually through the Environmental Protection Agency, not USDOE. It's through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. It is $7 billion nationwide to help bring the benefits of solar to low to moderate income households and communities. New Hampshire DOE is applying as the lead in a coalition application that also includes the New Hampshire Housing and the Community Loan Fund. This is an extremely competitive grant program. I think every state or most states are going to make an application. There's $7 billion allocated. There's something like $70 billion in requests. So 10 times the amount of funding available is being requested by the states. New Hampshire is requesting about $70 million ourselves. These applications are going to be scored by the EPA. And what we have is sort of a portfolio of different opportunities. For New Hampshire DOE, we're looking to scale up our LMI Community Solar Grant Program. We also want to look at bringing solar to public housing authorities and manufactured housing communities. I think we are expecting that application to be approved. We'll know how much money we're getting sometime in March with that funding available in summer of 2024. This slide is related actually to the Homes and HERA programs. It probably should have gone after those two. This is helping us look at, part of the difficulty with those programs, and I think Andre alluded to it, right, is there is sort of an inherent inflationary effect with these programs, with all of this money being available in all these states and all these organizations trying to spend that money. There is going to be an effect where the products aren't going to be available and they're going to be more expensive. The workforce, which is already strained, is going to have even more needs. So this is an area we've seen significant workforce shortages. These funds were granted to help the states provide training opportunities for the workforce necessary to implement these programs. We've had a lot of meetings with stakeholders, and we're working on an application that will help us skill up our existing workforce. And we do need to apply for that by the end of January 2024. There's a provision that helps states adopt the latest building energy codes. New Hampshire has been allocated $4 million through a formula. The state must submit a letter of intent to apply for these funds by November 21st. The Department of Energy does intend to apply for these funds. New Hampshire has traditionally been on a 3-year lagging cycle on building and energy codes. This is something that's the purview of the legislature. We're going to see what they choose to do to adopt and take our cues from them, but we do intend to submit a letter of intent to apply for these funds with applications due by the end of September 2025. So, Andre hit on a lot of these. There are a significant number of challenges. Not a fun thing to talk about, but it's really important as we look at these issues. So not blaming USDOE, it's not their fault, but as these bills were being passed, they had started a big reorganization, they had new staff, and now they have this massive influx of funding. And sort of the way the IRA passed, which was done through a budget reconciliation mechanism to get around the Senate filibuster and all that, meant that there was not a lot of statutory guidance included in the bill that passed. And that means that USDOE has had to develop a lot of this guidance themselves without a lot of direction. as mentioned before, there's been a ton of interest in these programs, and the administration, Congress, other folks have spent a lot of time talking them up. States like us in New Hampshire, we want to know what's going to be required of us if we're going to implement these funds, especially when we have our constituents who are clamoring for information. But that means, US DOE is in this position where they have to do a lot of work to get this guidance out the door. It's meant there have been delays in guidance, and sometimes that guidance changes pretty significantly, and we do have to account for that. There are a variety of onerous regulatory requirements, and I think we've heard about them throughout the day. Between the Build America, Buy America provision that Andre talked about, which is the single largest expansion of federal domestic content requirements. It passed in the IIJA, and it applies to every single federal dollar, not just those that passed in the IIJA. That's an onerous restriction for a lot of applicants, and that includes small and disadvantaged communities and smaller companies who have some difficulties there. Davis-Bacon is the prevailing wage law is something that prevents some real difficulties for applicants, especially applicants who aren't used to dealing with federal dollars. That's not just paying the prevailing wage, it's all of the requirements around it, like tracking and doing reporting to the Department of Labor on a weekly basis, following all the compliance. It can add significant hurdles, time and administrative hurdles to this. Part of the difficulty with these bills in general, and I know it's why a lot of folks like them, but there have been a lot of different goals attached to them. And these conflicting policy goals, be they climate goals, labor goals, goals to benefit disadvantaged communities, the supply chain goals, they all are well-intentioned, but when put together, it can dilute the power of the dollars that we're spending to achieve any particular one of those goals. And frankly, it adds time, it adds money, and it makes us less effective at spending those dollars. It's something we do have to account for and look at, and it's a real challenge. And frankly, there's just a multitude of different federal programs. Whether a program is $800,000 or $8 million or $80 million, there's just a degree of that overhead application process that has to go into all of it. We want to make sure we're doing things right. And so that wide variety of programs, it means that we have to look at and prioritize what we want to do. And that's really part of why it's going to be so important for you all to help us help you, and to look into what's available out there. Talk to your organizations. Again, go to the White House website and look at what's available out there. If you have questions, if you want to know if we're applying or if you should apply or if we can help you apply, reach out to us. We have a newsletter. It goes out every Friday. I don't know if anybody gets it, but it does give a pretty good sense of a lot of what we're looking at and can help bring opportunities to your attention. Sign up. We'll make this available to folks so that they can sign up. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We want to make sure we're doing everything possible to get as many dollars as we can here in New Hampshire. And I think I've talked enough. So thank you for listening. Again, happy to take questions, but ton of money out there.
So folks, what I think I'd like to do is just jump immediately to your questions. I'll waive my right to ask the first question because time is limited, and I'm sure that the slides have prompted a lot of questions for these folks from you all. So once again, there are going to be roving microphones around the room. I see Beth in the back waving her hand, and Annalie to the side. So we've got one question up front here, but let's queue up two, and I see one in the middle there. So just hold your hands high so the folks with the microphones can see you. And I will let Beth in. There we go. First question.
Hi. My question is mostly for Andre Briere, I think. The transportation money seems very much aimed at cars, EV charging, which is wonderful. And I've also heard the DOT presentation about roads, not much about mass transportation. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Absolutely, we're engaged with our public transportation providers. The deal with public transit electrification is technology limited right now. So there are certain providers where the existing technology and range of batteries makes sense because they run routes that makes sense with. Some of our providers are more inclined to look at other alternative fuels and pursue that as a way of reducing their carbon emissions. We are actively working with all of our transit providers. There are federal dollars available for electrification. I've personally ridden in a couple of really, really impressive electric passenger buses. Coupled, so there's a whole lot of things going on at once when it comes to public transit. One is the CDL driver shortage, the other is alternative fuels and electrification, and all of our transit providers are dealing with those two things at once. The trend, very frankly, I think with many of our transit providers is towards smaller vehicles where electrification makes more sense in terms of range, and they don't require a commercial driver's license to operate them. So these are conversations that are ongoing and that we're having with all of our transit providers. I did, by necessity, most of my comments were directed toward electrical vehicle infrastructure and grants. That's where most of the grant money is right now, but we're very focused on both public transit and aviation. Aviation, something called, well, I won't get into terminology, but FAA, we're an active partner with FAA in our neighboring states looking for advanced air mobility is what it's called. It's electrification of our aircraft and air logistics and delivery infrastructure. So there's a lot of conversations going on about that, how we best position ourselves to be a leader in that space, and it's something we're actively engaged in. But thank you for that question. Yeah, you had a follow-up. Yeah.
The question for those who couldn't hear was if there's consideration of rail. And just a quick follow-up, CMAQ can be used towards mass, so CMAQ, congestion mitigation and air quality grants can be used for mass
Which
transit.
some of those grants are going to be granted towards that. Rail is its own third rail in our state, forgive the pun. Yes, we went through the Capital Corridor project and that completed in January. About 9,000 pages of documentation and environmental studies to that. That's currently what we call on hiatus, on pause. The current, I'm gonna tiptoe and dance up here a little bit. Let's just say plans are on the shelf, and if at any time in the future there is a decision to move forward with that, we can pull them off the shelf. But that's another carbon reduction effort that we've been actively engaged in.
Next question. So why don't we'll try to queue them up. So Annalie, if you want to get this one here in the middle, and then Beth, if you want to, folks, if you have a question, raise your hand, and we'll try to. So okay, Beth's got the next one after that. Great.
Thank you. So M. Friedrichs, and thank you, I want to say to Chris Ellms for bringing up the IRA rebates. A lot of us here are representing energy committees or our state reps. So we're very much thinking about our constituents in this. I did notice that in September, Rhode Island announced it was releasing heat pump rebates. We've seen massive rebates in Maine as well. And Vermont was able to release $35 million in rebate funding for high efficiency appliances just 2 months after their flooding this past summer. So those are both states that are smaller than ours. And so I'd really love to hear what you are doing to really push up that rebate schedule and make sure that as soon as funds are available, New Hampshire is off and running like April of the coming year. And if not, what you can be doing to maybe even think about, we already have New Hampshire Saves rebate program. Can we expand that in the meantime to kind of cover this gap need? Because I keep hearing over and over in New Hampshire, we had the highest electric rates in the country other than Hawaii this past winter. So our constituents are really hurting. And what are you doing personally to make sure those rebates are available to constituents as fast as possible?
Sure, yeah, good question. And I can't speak to those other states and whether or not they are using these federal rebate dollars or if they're, they have existing state programs. I will say in terms of looking at other state programs or New Hampshire Saves programs, one difficulty with with doing some of the braiding that's been talked about in other states and something that we're going to look at as we develop these programs are that once federal money comes into the equation, all of those federal restrictions and all of those federal requirements get triggered with the first dollar that comes in. So making sure that whatever we do with federal dollars is something that we can achieve so that we don't change the character of a program to make it harder for those funds to actually go out is something that we have to look at. As we had talked about with the federal funds team and what we're doing to staff up, that's something that we were successful. We were one of the first states to be able to get early administrative funds from USDOE to help stand up and design these programs. Those dollars have come in. We're in the process of accepting them through the New Hampshire state system. It's pretty complex to accept money here in New Hampshire. That means it's good for accountability, but it can sometimes slow down that process. But we do intend to use those funds to design a program that works for New Hampshire once we take into account all those sort of, prerequisites that we have to account for, like income verification, like point of sale, like what are we going to do with retroactivity, and apply that. And then we're going to make this application happen as soon as we can. We want this money out the door once we get it. We don't want to sit on it. We don't want to delay it. But there is a lot that has to be done to make sure we're doing everything we can to make sure it's in the best interest of New Hampshire. I will say on the energy costs question, I know that's something folks are talking about. Look, we do have the lowest in New England, those rates in New England. Part of that is something that the default service costs that went into effect right as the war in Ukraine was starting. New Hampshire did see some unfortunate timing with that. What we're doing about that is looking at the Department of Energy through an investigative proceeding looking into default service. We have a report that's going to come out in December, and that's going to help provide the legislature and the PUC with some information on how to address those things. But for the time being, New Hampshire is at a lower rate situation than our neighbors.
So there in the back.
Yes, thank you. So in the medical community, which is also a complex system, people can access like an advocate to help them navigate through it. I'm looking at all these siloed programs and thinking about my community and how can I access those efficiently? How are you helping unsilo those programs, and have you considered having, individual advocates or ombuds people or something like that to help get from the community all the programs that they would be, accessible to them and that they could take advantage of?
So I'm not sure who that question's for, but Chris, you want to take a stab at it?
Sure, I'll take the first shot and hand it over to folks. Yeah, it's a really good point. I think education and outreach for folks is going to be really, really key to getting this money out and getting it out effectively and meeting the goals. That's why our advice is going to be, to the extent possible, talk about the funding opportunities, talk to us, talk to the federal delegation, talk to the feds. And that's something that we're going to have to look at. And if there are opportunities to improve that education and outreach, we're going to look into it and see what we can do to make sure we can get these dollars out the door.
So that was sort of my point, is that if you guys could work together or at the federal government level or at the state level to find a way to unsilo those programs for, the new fire station in my town, in Peterborough, that could probably take advantage of a lot of these things, but we have volunteers looking for programs. So it's great, all the money floating around, but I don't see really how it's going to benefit us yet.
Yeah, it's an important point. And just on the transportation side, the municipal planning organizations throughout the state are the interface between local communities and municipalities and the state. and then we plug them into US DOT. So those exist. The municipal planning organizations, if you don't know who yours is, just Google it and put in your town and say municipal planning organization, and you'll find which one is in your area. They are the interface, and they are that act as that ombudsman, help with grant applications, things like that.
And I will put in a plug that that very problem is something that our Energy Circuit Rider program is specifically aimed at. It is not the whole solution, obviously, but I think also in part, this type of event is really part of that solution as well. So talk is really the best we can do. So I think we have time for one more question, and I think it's going to go to Tad here up front.
Thanks. The two big EV charging grants that happened, the CFI, Charging Fueling Infrastructure, and Granite State Clean Fleet. Any sense of the timing of when the awards on those two will be announced?
Thank you, Tad. So Granite State Clean Fleets actually just closed on Friday, October 13th. We did receive a lot of applications, a lot. So thanks to all the towns and cities out there that applied. That was a Volkswagen-funded electric vehicle or diesel-to-diesel program. So as I mentioned, DES administers our state's Volkswagen funding, and we had a bucket of funding carved out for towns and cities mainly, and that's what Tad's referring to, the Granite State Clean Fleet program. We released $10 million and said, towns and cities in New Hampshire, send us your projects. We want to know what you're looking to replace. If it's a diesel and you want to replace it with a diesel, or if it's a diesel and you want to replace it with an electric vehicle. So we did receive a ton of response to that, Tad, because we're actually matching up to 80% or almost 100%, I think, if it's an electric project. Currently, there is a scoring committee that has been developed to review all those projects and score them. It's a competitive program. So hopefully sooner rather than later, if you look at the RFP, there actually is a deadline for when we anticipate notifying applicants of that, and we're working to meet that deadline. I believe it is November 17th is the deadline, but that was the anticipated deadline. So stay tuned, we are working really hard to meet that. The other program that you asked about, the CFI program, Tad, we have not been awarded that funding, as I mentioned. We are working behind the scenes to try to do our best to prepare as best as we can. That's why we're telling New Hampshire, towns and cities and businesses and nonprofits, hey, we might be having this funding available for community EV charging. We're hoping to hear by the end of the year and get something out the door as soon as we possibly can. But one thing that wasn't mentioned that I'm sure everybody's feeling is that there's a capacity challenge right now in just workforce in general. So we are also trying to hire and get up to speed. So if you're looking to work for the state government, go on our websites and check us out. We'd love to have more folks on board to help get this money moving. So.
Well, thank you. There we go. Just takes a sec. You know, one thing I wanted to close with that I didn't get a chance to address in my remarks is something that kind of implicitly we get at all the time, which is that our neighbors in Vermont, Massachusetts, for sure Quebec, north of the border, are light years ahead of us when it comes to charging infrastructure and things like that. What I call the starting gate of this EV revolution. And it is going to be a revolution. It's not going to be just automobiles. It's going to be buses. It's going to be aircraft. It's going to be the way we receive packages at our homes. Electricity is going to produce a lot of goods for us, a lot of good for our economy and our environment. The one thing we are focused on, though, is there's this huge invisible infrastructure when it comes to hydrocarbons that we don't think about but exists, and that is the full life cycle of the goods and vehicles that we use that are hydrocarbon based. What do you do with a totaled vehicle? How do you dispose of it? How do you recycle those component parts? That whole economy is yet to be developed for EVs. It's something that's on our mind. It's on the mind of a lot of our state legislators. We don't need to be the first movers in this space. We need to be the smartest, though. And I think there's a lot of good we can do and a lot of leadership that we could exercise regionally if we think hard about developing that full life cycle of electric vehicles, because There's implications with construction, with building codes, with the weight of these vehicles, with the disintegration of roads based on those heavier vehicles. How does, where do you park them at the airport? Where's safe to park them? How do you put out fires? How do you enable rural fire departments to be able to control fires from these vehicles? How do you recycle them? One of the most insightful speeches I ever heard on this topic was last summer down in Wilmington, Delaware. It's for our regional transportation conference. It was a tow truck driver. And she has been in the tow truck business for 30 years, and she talked about the nightmare that she's going through right now with EVs, because she's got no place to put them. When she puts them there, it's an automatic serious fire hazard for the rest of her yard, and nobody will take them, and nobody will recycle the parts, and nobody will recycle the batteries. So that's not doom and gloom, that's an opportunity, and it's an opportunity we in New Hampshire are going to try to be a leader in partnering with commercial partners, with non-governmental partners, try to be the thought leader in how we build the whole system, not just deploying chargers and selling vehicles.
All right. So with that, we're gonna let you go, but don't. So an applause for our panelists, but don't get up yet. So I have 3 notes to give you, and I will tell you the last one is the details of the cocktail hour, which is why you have to listen to the first 2 before I get to it. So the first is, so we are at Clean Energy New Hampshire a nonprofit. Coming up is the Super Bowl of Nonprofits, which is referred to as Giving Tuesday, which is the Tuesday after Cyber Monday, which is the Monday after Black Friday, which is the Friday after Thanksgiving, if there are all of you who don't know. So please, as you're thinking of your giving plans for the end of the year, think of Clean Energy New Hampshire. The second is that we are also hiring. We are looking for 2 staff. If you are interested in joining the Energy Circuit Rider team, or if you know someone who you think would be good at that job, please refer them to us. And if you don't know what I mean when I say the Energy Circuit Rider team, come talk to me and I will describe what they do. And the last is that the cocktail hour is up on the 2nd floor in the Frost and Hawthorne rooms. I don't really know what that means. I will be as lost as you all trying to find those 2 rooms, but everyone gets a drink ticket. So thank you all so much for coming, and see you upstairs.